the group members of this project agreed that we have difficulty maintaining on-task behaviors in the education setting. Moreover, seeing as how our classrooms are more like computers, Google Hangouts, discussion boards, and all of that, on-task behaviors are even more challenging because we're just relying on ourselves. So there's a study done in 2016 by Otero and Hott that discussed the benefits of on-task behavior, and it mentioned the academic success and productivity that comes with on-task behavior, and how the ability to monitor and manage your behavior is necessary for academic success. So we saw this article and we thought this is something that's actually something that we can do, and it would benefit us throughout grad school. So we're going to give you a little bit of the lit review to support why we did this, as well as the procedures and the details of it, and go over our graphs and all of that good stuff. So now Janelle is going to take it away.
All right. Well, self-monitoring is considered a self-management intervention. This behavioral intervention is typically used to increase behaviors such as attention, being on task, academic performance, and about the amount of academic work finished in that time period. So Rosemary Nelson in 1977 actually defined self-monitoring occurring when an individual self-assesses whether if a target behavior occurred or not, and self-records it in some way. Today, there's two types of self-monitoring that are usually used in an educational environment. There's the self-monitoring of on-task behaviors, and then there's the self-monitoring of the performance. For the self-monitoring of on-task behaviors, the individual is responsible to self-assess and self-record the ability to stay on task. For the self-monitoring of performance, the individual is responsible to assess the quality of their academic performance and records the results. For example, after an allotted amount of time, a student will assess how many spelling words they spelled correctly in that given amount of time and record it. In regards to increasing on-task behaviors, self-monitoring is one of the most used behavioral techniques that's used in the classroom today. Self-monitoring has also been used for academic performance for on-task behaviors with different children with different populations, such as attention deficit disorder. There was a study that specifically focused on using the self-monitoring procedures for on-task behaviors and the accuracy of the students' spelling. After students that were taught to self-monitor, the study revealed that high levels of on-task and spelling accuracy were reached by these children with attention deficit disorders, and their scores were even comparable to some of their peers. And now Carol will talk more about the academic benefits.
Okay, so the academic benefits. Self-monitoring amongst children has been examined extensively as a way to improve attention, academic productivity, and decrease off-task behavior in the classroom. Self-monitoring can be utilized amongst all populations that include children with disabilities and also children without disabilities. Self-monitoring can be used in a variety of settings. These may include self-contained classrooms and general classrooms. When self-monitoring is used in the classroom, it can alleviate the work of the teacher. The teacher can decrease the amount of time she spends redirecting the students and getting them back on task. The self-monitoring tool takes on the role of the teacher by reminding the students to get back on task. In some instances, self-monitoring tools can be disruptive due to the fact that they mostly rely on audio cues to remind the students he is on task. Recently, less disruptive tools have been developed. For example, Motive Aider is an electronic beeper that the students can wear on their waist. The beeper is programmed to send a cue after specific amounts of time, and the beeper is only felt by the student wearing it. Therefore, no other students will be disruptive. So Monitoring is a great tool that will not only benefit the students, but also the teacher. Self-monitoring is a very effective tool to use for self-prompting. It is easy to use, and it can be implemented fairly easy in the classroom.
Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the behavioral benefits. Self-monitoring, as Carol said, has demonstrated a lot of success across different populations and behaviors. For example, we have individuals with autism, individuals with cognitive impairments, learning disabilities, and ADHD. And these populations have all successfully used self-monitoring systems. And because the strategy is so easily implemented, it's also effective for addressing both academic and social behaviors in and out of the classrooms. So there's a study by Gans in 2008 that reports that studies have indicated that behavior improves independent of the level of accuracy in self-monitoring interventions, which basically means that despite showing a little bit less accuracy in the self-monitoring interventions, participants were still able to reduce their problem behaviors. In the autism population, self-monitoring has improved behaviors such as on-task behavior, socially appropriate behaviors, responding to others, completion of self-help tasks, sharing toys, and social initiations, just to share a few. For individuals with ADHD, self-monitoring has improved academic performance. And the same author, Gans, refers to another study in which the individuals with ADHD perform better in spelling and on-task behaviors. When self-monitoring has been used with a combination of populations or at different ranges of disabilities, it has resulted in an increase in academic engagement, productivity, appropriate behavior, and performance accuracy. In addition, students who self-monitor are more likely to behave independently and appropriately without supervision. There's another study in 2012 that showed that task completion is improved when specific and descriptive instructions are given. And it's important to note that these self-monitoring strategies go on beyond the classroom. It also enhances daily living skills. These strategies promote more natural behavior changes rather than relying on external factors like teachers or any kind of authority figure like that to help redirect them. So self-monitoring provides a level of accountability for students to adhere to. And lastly, competence is actually a side effect of self-monitoring programs, seeing as how the success of the strategies benefit the student both in and out of the classroom setting. So now Danilda will go on and talk a little bit about the academic benefits.
Okay, so I will talk about the academic benefits using self-reinforcement. Self-reinforcement is defined as administering to oneself freely attainable rewards in response to one's performance. When a certain standard of performance is achieved, the individual then rewards themselves with a preferred item. Self-reinforcement is a method that acts to strengthen a certain behavior. This is further supported by B.F. Skinner's fundamental principle, operant conditioning, which proposes that a response followed by a reinforcer is strengthened and is most likely to occur again in the future. Several studies have shown an increase in academic performance when self-reinforcement procedures are in effect. One study conducted by Hayes examined the role of the effectiveness of self-reinforcement on undergraduates. The participants chose tangible reinforcers such as candies, fruits, and nuts, and the results indicated that self-reinforcement procedures significantly impacted academic performance on a studying task. Another study that further assessed the impact of self-reinforcement and academic performance was that of Chase and Clement. The participants in the study were diagnosed with ADHD, and the purpose of the study was to examine different combinations of treatment phases consisting of Ritalin with non-contingent reinforcers and self-reinforcement, along with placebo and self-reinforcement evaluation. The findings revealed that self-reinforcement was more successful at increasing both accuracy and academic achievement than Ritalin alone. These studies suggest that reinforcement interventions that allow for students to work towards a self-chosen reward prove to increase the amount and quality of their academic performance. In addition, Albert Bandura examined several features of self-reinforcement. First, an individual must have control of reinforcers, meaning individuals should be able to freely access and administer their reinforcers at any time. A second feature is conditional self-administration of reinforcers. Although access to reinforcers are available at any time, their self-administration should be regulated to when appropriate behavior has been achieved. And a third critical feature is adoption of performance standards. Reinforcers should be contingent upon performance standards, and a criterion should be adopted to serve as a cue of delivery of reinforcers. Okay, and now Diana will talk about the behavioral benefits.
Talk about the behavioral benefits of self-reinforcement. While there haven't been many studies that have explored the behavioral benefits of self-reinforcement, from what can be gathered is that self-reinforcement has assisted in maintaining verbal discriminations that have been learned under external reinforcement. And in another study, it was found that self-reinforcement kept motor behavior in children at a higher output than if there were no reinforcement or non-contingent reinforcement. What can be gathered from these studies is that self-reinforcement is useful and can serve to maintain a behavior when there are no other external controls, as well as lead to consistency in managing contingencies over several scenarios. In Johnson, they intended to study self-reinforcement as a variable of behavior change when children who were deficient in appropriate attention-seeking behaviors. This study provided a base for testing out 4 hypotheses on self-reinforcement. The first was if self-reinforcement could maintain the desired behavior in individuals whose behavior had been deficient. The second hypothesis was if it could maintain a desired behavior as well as a reinforcement being given. The third hypothesis was if it would produce behavior more resistant to extinction as opposed to behavior that is reinforced by another. And the last hypothesis was if self-reinforcement would display more generalization than behavior sustained by external reinforcement. The results from the study on the first hypothesis concluded that self-reinforcement could sustain the behavior and that the self-reinforcement procedures can have reinforcing properties. In the second hypothesis, Johnson concluded that self-reinforcement is just as effective as an external reinforcement, and there are no considerable differences between them. In the third hypothesis, they stated that while inconclusive, training in self-reinforcement stunted extinction in the initial stages. And the last hypothesis had too many confounding variables involved that it made it difficult for the results to be interpreted. Generalization seemed to be one of the more complex and far-reaching effects of self-reinforcement, thus making it difficult to reproduce and required more time than was available in that study. And now Stephanie is next.
To conclude the literature review, Prater defines self-monitoring as a procedure that requires students to monitor their own behavior. For example, students may be taught periodically to ask themselves, am I paying attention or am I on task? The technique requires the students to self-assess their behavior to determine if a certain behavior has occurred and self-record the occurrence of the behavior. Self-reinforcement has been defined as administering to oneself freely attainable rewards in response to one's performance. Self-monitoring and self-reinforcement together have shown to be effective in increasing on-task behavior in classrooms. In addition, self-monitoring and self-reinforcement provide both academic and behavioral benefits. Studies have shown that academic benefits of self-monitoring include increasing duration of attention and increasing academic productivity. Several studies have shown that for students with ADHD, self-monitoring and self-reinforcement have increased the accuracy of academic performance more so than medication. Behavioral benefits of self-monitoring include decreasing problem behaviors through the increase of on-task behavior as a replacement. Self-reinforcement has also proven to be effective in academic and behavioral aspects. Academically, studies have shown that self-reinforcement improves academic performance, both in typically developing students and students with developmental delays. Behaviorally, positive and negative reinforcement have been used to increase on-task behaviors in individuals in the classroom. When both self-reinforcement and self-monitoring are implemented in the classroom, on-task behaviors increase as a means of replacing problem behaviors, thus improving academic performance. Janelle, do you want to go over the protocol?
Hey, Janelle, you're muted, just so you know.
The purpose of the study was to increase on-task behavior of reading for the 6 graduate students using self-monitor procedures, in which 2 of the conditions were with and without reinforcement. Specifically, members of the group sought to evaluate the effects or lack thereof of positive reinforcement on on-task behavior and the data collection and self-monitoring intervention. For our methods, the participants included of 6 graduate students from Ball State University. The majority of the participants were from Florida, which were 5 of us, and 1 of them was from Chicago. All of us are earning a master's in applied behavior analysis and will graduate in 2017. The participants met via video chat before the study was chosen to discuss some of the real-life behavior issues they struggle with. It was decided that all participants struggle with on-task behaviors and how that directly affects their academic productivity. Carol will talk more about the setting and other parts of our procedures.
Okay, for a setting, the study took place in 6 separate homes of each participant. Each participant conducted their study at a desk with a book. Applied Behavior Analysis by John Cooper. We decided to conduct the study in the home of each participant to control external variables, since at a coffee shop or library, there may have been too many distractions to the participants at the time of the intervention. The dependent variable on test behavior was defined as the following: eyes looking down at the book, engaging in scanning motion from left to right, and engaging in behavior only relevant to the task, like turning pages. Some behaviors that do not qualify as on task are looking around, checking phone, not reading the specified material, surfing the internet, scribbling on paper, and engaging in behaviors not directly related to the reading or text. Now, Diana will talk about the experimental design and treatment conditions.
To assess the differential effects of the 2 different conditions, self-monitoring with reinforcement and self-monitoring alone, the study was carried out using alternating treatment design. When on 2 different days of the week, participants carried out 2 different conditions, 1 per day. This allowed for participants of the study to compare the effects of reinforcement on self-monitoring on a week-to-week basis. In condition 1, self-monitoring alone involved the subject self-recording on-task behaviors without any tangible or verbal reinforcement from the investigator. In condition 2, self-recording with reinforcement, it involves presenting tangible reinforcements preferred by the subject. During this condition, reinforcement was provided by the investigator immediately after the session during feedback, depending on how closely the subject's data matched that of the investigator. Small cue cards were presented to the subject to communicate the conditions and avoid any interruption. 1 card read SMA, and the second card read SMR+. Depending on the condition, the subject followed instructions accordingly. And now Danilda will cover the materials.
Okay. So the participants recorded each interval with an application called Timer Plus. Timer Plus is a free application that can be downloaded onto the smartphone via the application store. Timer Plus allowed the subjects to set a continuous timer for 2-minute intervals for a total of 20 minutes. After the end of each interval, a beeping noise sounded and the timer reset itself. To record data after every beep, a self-monitoring data sheet was created. The self-monitoring data sheet consists of 2 columns and 10 rows. Column 1 is labeled on task, and column 2 is labeled off task. The 10 rows is to mark an X for either on task or off task in its respective column at the end of each interval. Investigators were present via Google Hangouts to determine whether the subject had taken data accurately. Google Hangouts is a communication service that allows individuals to communicate via video chat. This communication tool was utilized for sessions that required an investigator present. Reinforcers were determined on an individual basis. Each subject chose their own reinforcers to receive at the end of the treatment session. The different phases were identified by 2 cue cards. One of the cue cards read self-monitoring with reinforcement. This meant that reinforcement was available at the end of each treatment session, contingent upon the accuracy of the match scores between the investigator and the subject. The other cue card read self-monitoring alone. This meant that reinforcement, neither verbal nor tangible, was not available at the end of each treatment session. And now Joanna will take over and talk about treatment fidelity.
All right, so to ensure treatment fidelity, we created an instructional checklist that listed all the steps of the process. So before and after each session, the investigator and the subject reviewed the checklist to ensure that the procedures would be carried out the same. And after the session, the checklist was reviewed together to compare the results and accuracy. And the percentage agreement between the investigator and subject should be at least 80%. The following steps are what we included. So we had step by step. First, you open up your application timer. You set the timer for 2-minute intervals for a total of 20 minutes. You grab your materials like your data sheet, your writing utensils. For the treatment condition with reinforcement, you choose your highly preferred reinforcer to have at the end of the session. You also made sure to have your Cooper book. Then we begin reading, and when the timer goes off at the end of each 2-minute interval, we marked in the appropriate column on the data sheet whether you were engaged in either on-task or off-task behavior. We keep the data sheet for collection and graphing purposes, and then we review the steps taken for data collection with other group members. And then before beginning each session, we made sure to run the treatment condition that has not been run. So if on Monday it was self-monitoring alone condition, we made sure that on Wednesday, for example, we were running the self-monitoring with reinforcement. And it should have been 2 different treatment sessions per week, like we mentioned. So now we will go into our procedures. Stephanie.
Yes. So we did both baseline and intervention conditions. So for baseline, once the subject's engaged in on-task behavior at 30% or higher for 3 consecutive sessions, then the treatment was implemented. So for our intervention, data was collected twice a week for 6 weeks, which amounted to a total of 12 sessions. Before beginning the session, each subject and investigator selected their choice of reinforcers for the reinforcement condition, only if that condition was being run that day. The reinforcers ranged from candy and other edibles to Netflix and drinks. The subject and investigator then gathered the required materials and reviewed the instructional checklist. The investigator used the cue card to notion the start time. Timer plus was set to ring every 2 minutes for a total of 20 minutes. At the end of each 2-minute interval, both the investigator and the subject marked whether the participant was on task or off task on the data sheet. At the end of the session, if the reinforcement condition had taken place, the investigator reviewed the accuracy of the data collected and delivered reinforcement if match scores were at 80% or above. If the self-monitoring alone condition had taken place, the data was collected and no feedback was provided. Next, we're going to talk about the graphs. Everyone's going to go through their own. Janelle, did you want to go ahead and start?
Well, I'm going to give a brief overview or a discussion. Well, typically self-monitoring is used an approach to increase self-regulation skills in an individual. We replicated the study of Otero and Hott because we wanted to evaluate the differential effects of positive reinforcement on on-task behavior and by using a self-monitoring intervention. But the difference between ours and their study was mostly that our students were graduate students and their students were children. Well, the 6 graduate students examined their on-task behavior by self-monitoring and self-recording over the duration of about 6 weeks. In general, the results for both treatment conditions increased on-task behaviors among each graduate student when compared to their baseline data. Joanna will be the first one to show her treatment. It's
Professor, do you rather share our screen or show you a paper? Do you care? Doesn't matter. Good talk. Okay. So for my on-task behavior, let me see here. We have, hold on. That we can see that once I started treatments, there was just a little bit of an increase in responding with the reinforcement condition. It appears that I really didn't need the addition of the reinforcement to remain on task. I had high on-task percentages for both conditions throughout the study. It only varied by 10% and at one point from 90% to 100% on-task behavior. So it didn't particularly make that much of a significant difference. Janelle?
all right. Let me share my graph. So this is my graph. As you can see, the on-task behaviors improve for both of the conditions. There's a slight significant increase for the condition with reinforcement when compared to the one without. the reinforcement. So this suggests that the reinforcement condition had a greater impact on my on-task behavior than without. Yeah, there was a big difference. So now whoever's next can go show theirs.
Okay. And I don't know if you can see, but this is my graph. So for my on-task behavior, it increased in both treatment conditions when compared to the baseline. There was a slight improvement in responding in regards to the reinforcement condition when compared to the condition that did not have reinforcement. So again, with my reinforcement condition, it seemed to have improved, and it ranged from maybe like 20 to 30%. So if you didn't get to see it, again, here is my graph. There it is. Okay, and now Carol. We'll speak on hers.
Okay, so for my on-task behavior increased during both interventions. However, there was a significant increase in the reinforcement condition. My data suggests that my on-task behavior is more likely to increase when
Now I'm going to go over some of the limitations that we encountered. All right, so there were a number of limitations that surfaced with the study. To begin with, the design of the study may have served as a limitation. For the sake of replicating the study, we used the alternating treatment design like they did. However, because of the alternating conditions between each week, it's unclear which condition is affecting the dependent variable. Another design to consider would be the withdrawal design. This design may aid in a better illustration of experimental control between the dependent and the two conditions. Also, another thing was the distance between the participants of the study. It may have compromised the integrity of the study. Conducting IOA using internet video calls may have led to some inaccurate observation with internet connection problems and lagging, just like we have even tonight. Another limitation involved the materials. While the data collecting method of using pen and paper used served the participants of the group well, a more accurate form of data collection for frequency of off-task behavior, such as a counter, that may have yielded more accurate data. The reason for using a counter is because stopping every 2 minutes to collect data on paper is not beneficial to the overall goal of staying on task. You still have to stop and tally versus using a counter where you just click and go, click and go. Diana?
Some more limitations that presented themselves may have resulted due to the short time constraints. Factors that have been affected included maintenance, generalization, and reactivity. The first limitation to note is the absence of a maintenance and generalization phase. For future studies, a maintenance phase could be conducted each month to assess if the results were maintained. Furthermore, testing for generalization would prove to be beneficial to further validate the results. The same procedures could be tested in other settings, such as a library or a coffee house, or using different stimuli, such as reading for other classes. As it stands, the participants of the study showed success during the self-monitoring procedures, which could have indirectly been influenced by the observer reactivity effect. The self-monitoring with reinforcement is the only condition in which the subject is being watched. Therefore, knowing that the participants' data were going to be evaluated may have resulted in a better performance. Therefore, extending the project for a longer period of time would provide a better insight into the effectiveness of these self-monitoring procedures, as it would give the reactivity effect time to diminish.
Okay, so Stephanie and the other group members will present their graphs now as well, and then we'll go right into IOA, and finally the results. You're on mute, Steph. Or muted.
Sorry, thank you. My graph here shows that I jumped from my baseline at an average of about 57% on task to 80% and 86% for the alone, self-monitoring alone, and the self-monitoring with reinforcement. Both interventions were effective for my study, or for my on-task behavior. But neither one was much more reinforcing than the others. Diana, did you want to go over yours?
Oh, wrong. Yes. One moment. Okay, that's funky. All right. All right, and in my graph, it shows that there was an increase, not as much as I would have liked, but yeah, there was an increase regardless with in the treatment phase with the reinforcement. There's like a 10%. There's like a 10% difference between the usage of reinforcement with and the non-usage of reinforcement. But yeah, the usage of the reinforcement definitely assisted in me staying more on task and with this intervention.
All right, Professor. So then we have the results section that we could present to you. It has a wide range of numbers. We kind of briefly went over our results with you. I don't know if you really want to know the exact ranges or whatnot, if that's fine, or if you want to just go ahead and jump into our questions now and discuss.
Yeah, I think that I don't need to see it or hear any more of the results. I kind of got the gist from the graphs and
Awesome. Perfect. Okay, great.
So did you guys have more, or you want me to ask questions now?
No, that was it.
Yeah.
That was it.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly the difference between, I understand the difference between the reinforcement treatment phase versus the no reinforcement, but the difference between baseline and the self-monitoring alone condition was just that, so in baseline you were recording each time you got off task, is that right? And then in the self-monitoring condition, that's where you're going through the checklist, asking yourself and reminding yourself whether you're on task. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So in the original study, I'm just wondering if they had external data collectors take data during baseline, because in some ways it's kind of like during baseline you were not following the self-monitoring checklist, which was helpful. It was helpful for most of you, but just recording how often you're getting off task is, a method of self-monitoring. Do you guys know the answer to that? Whether or not they did that in the study, like had the person recording their own data, or whether they had an external person? If you don't know, it's okay.
No, they did. They monitored them, and since they were kids, they monitored, and once they reached, I think it was 50% of more of off-task behavior, then they started intervention.
Okay, so yeah,
They
obviously,
weren't actually recorded, if that's what you meant. Yeah.
yeah, so obviously a different situation, since you had to be recording your own data in your project. But that's something I would discuss, as a limitation, just kind of the nature of the study, was that by having yourself record data during baseline, in some ways that's intervention in itself. But it still looks like for most of you, the checklist, and then for some of you the reinforcement too, was an effective strategy. So that was good to see. Let's see. I think that was my main question, was just kind of, the other thing is I was wondering if you thought about, you said I think, Joanna, you said it would be one future direction would possibly be doing withdrawal design. And I was wondering to myself, like that definitely is, you'd be able to reverse to the previous condition where the checklist isn't present. But I was wondering if any of you had like started to covertly go through the checklist without having it in front of you. So like you've gone a week with going through this checklist. Now it's the baseline condition again. Do you think you would be in that habit of continuing to be self-monitoring, even if you weren't writing it down?
I think it's one of those behaviors that like it's irreversible, kind of like when you learn it, you can't unlearn it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things that even if you did a withdrawal, that you wouldn't be able to like
Learn it.
learn it again. Like you can't unlearn it.
So that's right. And I was just that's what I was just curious about, because in that way I do think that would be a weakness of withdrawal design, and is suggestive of why they did use an alternating treatment design. Were there any, I know you said like reinforcers were like candy, Netflix, drink. Did you find certain reinforcers more reinforcing than others?
Depends on if you had a really long day and your drink at the end of the reinforcer period was,
That's why
good.
we had let everyone choose their own. Like it wasn't set every time. It was like whatever you had the motivation for at that moment is what we would set for that contingency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like for example, for me, it was just candy, chocolate. That's my weakness. So.
And that was a strong enough reinforcer for you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, that's all I have. I don't think I have any more questions. You guys did a really nice job. So the next thing will just be to upload it to the discussion board that you're assigned to, and to watch your fellow classmates' videos and just have a little bit of a discussion on the discussion board.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Have a great day, you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.